Hello, MYP parents and students. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Vaughan Kitson, and I'm the Deputy Head of Secondary as well as MYP Coordinator here at Raha. Looking forward to another interesting action-packed year, obviously with a few adjustments based on the current situation. So hopefully this presentation will highlight some of the main aspects of the MYP as a whole, as a program, as well as explain how we do things here at Raha specifically. Okay, so this presentation will cover a few main aspects. Firstly, looking at the different subject areas available, what a unit of study looks like in the MYP, what goes into it, what makes it different, all about assessment and reporting, demystifying all these processes for you. What I want to do is just look at these 8 subject areas for a moment. Right, so in the language and literature subject area, we have English A and Arabic A for native Arabic speakers. Individuals and societies, also known as humanities, is basically geography and history in grades 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then in grade 10, the students also do modules on psychology and some economics. Mathematics in grades 6, 7, and 8 is all students do the same course called Standard Mathematics, and then 9 and 10 they are separated based on their ability in the subject. Product design and digital design, 1 semester of each. The arts in grades 6, 7, and 8 are carousels, basically 1 term of music, drama, and visual arts each. And then students may choose at the end of grade 8 from visual arts, media arts, drama, or music. And they have the option of actually dropping arts entirely in grade 10, or having 1 art, or having 2 arts. And we'll get more into those options in a moment. Sciences in grades 6 to 8 is integrated science, where students do mixtures of chemistry, biology, and physics. Grade 9, they do 1 term of each, so it's more specific. And then in grade 10, they do the year-long science courses. And that is where the choices or options come in. So the options affect sciences, the arts, and design when students are finishing grade 9 and moving into grade 10. Well, actually, the choices are made quite early on in grade 9. And basically, to cut a long story short, out of these 3 subject groups, students need to select 3 subjects. So they can either have 1 science, 1 of the arts and design, or they can have 2 sciences and an art, 2 sciences and design, or 1 science and 2 arts. Or maybe I said that already. Okay, but we'll get more into details for the current grade 9 students and parents. You'll need to know more about that fairly soon. Right, then we have PHE, and of course language acquisition, which is your French, Spanish, or Arabic B. And for the first time this year, grade 10 students have been able to opt out of Arabic, which many of them have done. So basically, a unit of study in the MYP is made up of quite a lot of different aspects, attributes, and this is what makes the middle years program of the IB quite a unique way of teaching, because everything's packaged into this or these aspects which drive the inquiry-based teaching. So a unit of study would have things called key and related concepts. I'll show you more of those in a moment, as well as global context, statement of inquiry, inquiry questions. We'll look at all of these briefly. Subject group objectives, which is A, B, C, D, we'll have a look at. Summative assessments, of course, and then there's formative assessments. And then ATL, or approaches to learning. Okay, so these are the buzzwords which you'll see and hear about quite a lot. So looking at the key concepts, the things that make up the structure of the unit when teachers are developing units of study, there are 16 key concepts. And these key concepts then drive the unit's development, along with related concepts. Now, the related concepts are very subject specific. So, for example, in sciences, we've got all of these related concepts. The teacher would then assign related concepts to the current unit of study, depending on, of course, what the unit is and the focus, including the global context, which we'll get to next. Right, so global contexts. So for those of you who went through the PYP with your children, which is probably most of you, you went through things called units of inquiry, or UOIs. So the global contexts, there are 6 of them, and they are pretty much mapped from the UOIs. So the ones that we have in the MYP are these: identities and relationships, orientation in time and space and time, etc. And then when the teacher is developing the units, there's a lot of subsections which we would then use to drive the structure, the overall structure of a unit. Okay, so just a quick look at the curriculum guides, using last year's as an example. Right, so how do we find the curriculum guides on the school website? There we go. There's the curriculum guides there. So just as an example, we'll look at grade 9. Okay, so this is obviously last year's. The updates are coming soon. As you can see in the slides, 13th of September, that week is the aim. So each of the guides have the same sort of structure, which is basically a few pages of introduction, which is hopefully quite useful information for you. Just general stuff about the MYP, much of what we'll talk about in this presentation. And then each subject has just a general discussion, introduction, and then launches into some of the aspects which make up the unit. So statement of inquiry, global context, in this case is identities and relationships, key concept, related concepts, and the criteria which are being assessed in that unit, which we'll get to in a moment. Then we have approaches to learning skills. These are the specific skills which have been chosen by the teachers, and we'll try and get the students to develop those skills and reflect on the development of those skills during the teaching and learning in the unit. And then, of course, learning experiences, basically just a snapshot of what will be happening in the unit. And then that would be the same idea for all the other subjects as well. Right, so coming back to aspects which make up the unit, the inquiry questions. There are 3 types of inquiry questions which teachers develop at the start of the unit: factual, conceptual, and debatable questions. So I'll just show you an example. So in grade 8 science, we've got some factual: what is an isotope? It's pretty much just something that someone could Google, I guess. Conceptual: how does the electron configuration affect the type of bond an atom can form? So getting students to think more deeply about the concepts. And then debatable, all right, getting students to analyze more deeply and look at things from different perspectives. So these inquiry questions will generally be made available to the students at the start and then referred to during the course of the unit. Not necessarily every single lesson, but these are just things to bear in mind and at times focus on explicitly. Then we come to the ATL skills. Now, ATL skills are a very, very important part of the IB. ATL skills are used in the PYP, MYP, and the diploma program. And in the MYP specifically, there are approximately 134 skills divided into 5 categories of skills. Those are them. And as I've said, it's an integral part of all of the units. So just a very quick snapshot. These posters are up around the school in all classrooms, just so that the students have quick access. So we have communication, social, self-management, research, and thinking skills. Now, in addition to students reflecting on these skills in class, the grade 7 and 8 students will also be using the Skill Tracker app, which is basically a website which allows them to record when they have actually worked on a skill and to sort of rate themselves in terms of how well they think they are progressing in that skill. In terms of the big picture of skills, so starting with the learner profile, skills are linked to the learner profile. In the PYP, MYP and DP we have the 5 categories, but the 10 skill clusters are unique to the MYP, and you can see they are grouped like this. So the students will often hear the term core skills. So these are things like managing time, note-taking, listening, being organized, that sort of thing. And these are skills which need to be worked on a regular basis by the majority of students, some probably more than others. So we'll be reminding students a lot about these, especially at the younger grade levels. Okay, so just a short video to look at assessment in the MYP, and I'll go through most of these aspects anyway, but I'm sure you've heard from me enough at the moment. Let's have a watch. Okay, so as you saw in the video, they refer to the different criteria in all the subjects. So here's a snapshot of the 8 subject areas and the names of the assessment criteria. You'll notice that knowing and understanding comes up 5 times, so that's quite a common area. It's more or less, I suppose you could liken it to your traditional type of tests in other systems. For example, in mathematics, that would be your standard kind of test. With tiered questions, different levels of questions. And then B, C, and D would be more investigative or explorative types of tasks or even mini projects. In addition to the 8 subject groups, we also have IDUs or interdisciplinary units, as well as a personal project. And these, as you can see, are also A, B, C, D criteria. So it's all fairly uniform, easy to understand in that sense. So in each grade level, students will study one unit which is an interdisciplinary unit between 2 of the subject groups. So for example, in grade 6, it's between individuals and societies with English. Grade 7 is with PHE and Science. Grade 8 is Maths and Design. Grade 9 is English and the Arts. And grade 10 is Maths and PHE. Now, the IDU is actually going through a complete revamp. So during this year, we'll be completely revamping units based on the new criteria provided by the IB for next year. Okay, so the personal project, this only affects grade 10 students. This is the culminating project of the MYP. In grade 5, they have the exhibition. In grade 10, you have the personal project. And if you have a student, a child in grade 10, you will no doubt be hearing about the personal project a lot over the coming months. These are normally handed in around about the 23rd of February. So before then, we have the exhibition of the projects in January, and the actual report writing, which is a massive undertaking, which is quite different to the exhibition in grade 5. How are final report grades calculated? Okay, so here we go. So based on that little video you saw as well, each subject group has their A, B, C, D. Each criterion scores a maximum of 8, so 8 times 4 is 32. For each subject in the report, it's out of 32. Now that score out of 32 gets translated into a grade out of 7 as follows. So at the top end, firstly, the 28, which students are often aspiring to get. So that's your 7, and then 24 to 27 is a 6, etc. Now if you look at the general descriptors of these grades, you can see that even a 4 is good quality work. So often there's a misinterpretation or misconception that a 4 or a 5 is not good enough. In actual fact, if you're achieving a 6 or a 7 in a subject, you're doing particularly well. In the individual assessments, where you can get a maximum of 8, technically if you score 7 or 8, you are working above grade level, considering if a 5 is good, or a 6 is good, or a 7 is good. Okay, everyone is different, and yes, a 5 is good, produces generally high quality work. There is a bit of a misconception that 4s and 5s are not acceptable to some, but we're trying to get rid of that, because if you dig deeper into the actual wording, you've actually done quite well to get a 5 as a final grade for a subject. So at the bottom end, or lower end I should say, so that just gives you an idea. Now in terms of the assessment criteria rubrics, the ones published by the MYP, or by the IB I should say, are designed for MYP 1, 3 and 5, in other words grades 6, 8 and 10. So the grade 6s have their unique rubric, grade 7s and 8s use the MYP 3 rubric, grade 9 and 10 use the MYP 5 rubric. These are of course unique to each subject. We'll have a quick look at one in a moment. And then each strand is assessed a minimum of twice during the year. So I'll explain to you what a strand is. So as an example, let's look at language and literature, which could be either English or Arabic A. So this is a year 1, which is grade 6. And these are the strands 1, 2 and 3. So each of these rubrics follows the same structure, divided into level 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or 7 to 8. So based on whatever the assignment, project, task, test happens to be, the teacher will mark each of these strands. So for example, the student might achieve 7 to 8 for strand 3, but only 5 to 6 for strand 2, and then one or the other, or even lower down in strand 1. So that's where the best fit approach comes in. The teacher will decide where the student has achieved based on the overall big picture, looking at the strands and making the final decision from that. So for this reason, it's extremely important that teachers standardize together, and this is what makes the MYP quite unique. There's not too many other systems where it's absolutely essential that teachers work together to make sure that the feedback provided to students is consistent across the different classes based on an agreed understanding of the rubric for that specific assessment task. So it does get quite complicated. It does take a lot of behind-the-scenes work by teachers. So just to give you a quick snapshot of what it looks like. So communication with the students and the parents before and after assessments looks as follows. So a task will be posted on ManageBack, so the student will see it pop up in their calendar, normally at least a week prior to the assessment. As far as possible, assessments are returned within 2 weeks. Some, for example, a short maths test, for example, might be returned a lot sooner. However, this is not an expectation. In some cases, it could take longer. As I've said here, for example, if one teacher has 3 grade 7 classes, so they've got at least 75 projects to mark, for example, these things take time. So just painting the picture for you there. So the mark on ManageBack will be accompanied by a comment. Now the comments might appear on ManageBack, or they might be in Teams, or they might be in the class OneNote or class notebook. Now in terms of these comments, what do they look like? In some cases they might be quite generic, in other cases more detailed, more individualized. It depends on the nature of the task. There might be additional comments on the work itself. There might even be audio comments, especially during the distance learning period. In terms of assigning the final grade in the MYP, how does that work? So just got a couple of examples here for you. So this is obviously science. So looking at the 4 different criteria. And you can see there are 2 A's, both times the student scored a 7. So of course the best fit here would be a 7. And this one would be a 7. So those are quite straightforward. Over here, students first scored a 7, then scored an 8. So what the teacher would do is consider recency. The most recent assessment was an 8, so it's likely that the teacher would assign an 8 here. So far we've got a 7, 7, 8. Now I've included this one for a reason. If there's a bar with stripes on, that basically means it's a formative assessment, which does not count towards the final grade. So the teacher would take into account here an 8 and then a 7. Now the formative assessment could sway the decision either way. However, it's not officially counted as one of the assessments. Now in this case, an 8 and then a 7, you would presume that since the most recent is a 7 and the formative was a 7, the teacher would go for a 7 in this case. But of course, I'm just guessing here. I don't know the student at all. It's very much about the teacher knowing the student and the big picture. So overall, what are we looking at? 7, 7, 8, 7, which comes to 29. 29 is a 7 overall, so the student would get a 7 for science for that semester or for the whole year. Please remember that assessments are cumulative, so semester 1, semester 2 are not separate, apart from design, and of course the separate arts subjects are standalone subjects. But all the other subjects are continuous assessment throughout the entire year. So I've just included this one here to show you that it's not always as straightforward as this one. And it just gives you an idea once again of the importance of teachers knowing their students and of teachers standardizing together to come up with a final grade accurately, consistently. Over here the student scored a 0. Alright, so that might have been because of extenuating circumstances, or it might have simply been because the student did not hand in, or they were late, too late. So you wouldn't just ignore the 0, it does actually affect the overall grade. A couple more examples. So maths, as you can see, a lot more criterion A assessments than the others. So just to make very clear, one thing we do not do is average. So we would not just add up the 5 plus 3 plus 4 plus 7 plus 3 plus 2 and divide the total by 6. Okay, that's very un-IB. So the teacher would once again look at the big picture, look at the most recent assessments as well. This is a very tricky one because the child did particularly well here and then sort of bombed over here. So coming up with the best fit here, the teacher would need to know the student very well, once again. So just to give you an idea of what these graphs could look like at the end of an academic year. So looking at reporting periods and details, the Interim 1 report in early November is more of a settling in type of report. Basically, the teacher identifying if intervention is required at the bottom end or if the child is already excelling at the top end. So a lot of the time, students will either be adequate or developing proficiency at this stage. However, if intervention required appears on the report, it means that intervention is definitely required because teachers are trying to look out for the students' best interests, and there might be some major concerns if that appears on the report. Semester 1 comes out in early February, so I'll show you what examples of those reports look like in a moment. We'll have the best fit for each criteria as well as the ATL skills. And Interim 2 only occurs for grade 9 and 10. The reason for that is because grade 9s will be making selections for grade 10, grade 10s will be making selections for the diploma program, so we need that data. There's no huge value in having an Interim 2 report for grades 6 to 8 because not many assessments would have been done after the conclusion of semester 1 by that stage. Personal project scores for grade 10 will also appear on the Interim 2 report. And then the end of year report, which is, as I've said, it's cumulative assessment over the whole year, and also information about the student's service action completion, which is another aspect of the MYP, which your children will be informed about in detail by Mr. Stephen Buchanan, who runs the services action, as well as their advisory teachers and their heads of grade. The Interim 1 report categories, you can call them, as I've mentioned, intervention required is at the bottom end, excelling. So this terminology is taken straight from the general grade descriptors. So it just gives you an idea in November where the teacher sees your child as performing. And this is what the report can look like in November. Now, the semester 1 report has all the subjects, final grade, and then the ATL ratings, you could call them. And here are the descriptors of those. So N is novice, etc. Okay, NA simply means that it's not addressed. It doesn't mean that the child has failed in the skill. So one thing to point out as well is for Arabic social studies or UAE social studies, as well as Islamic studies, these subjects are not IB subjects. So we don't call them middle years, we call them middle school subjects, and they would actually get a percentage. So I'll come back to the other one. So that is over here. So you get a percentage for the middle school subjects. So it's coming back to the semester 1 report again. So each of the individual subjects would also have the criteria levels. The total, of course, 22 translates to a 5 because 24 would be a 6, 19 to 23 is a 5, as well as a comment. Now this is a generic comment that each child gets. The reason we don't have individualized narrative comments is because of manage-back and feedback after assessments. So your child will be receiving comments based on their assessments throughout the year, which means that you should have the big picture of what is going on throughout the year. Hence, no need for additional long narratives about individual students in the reports. So one question we get from time to time is, my child didn't do very well, they think they can do better. Can they please do another assessment to get a better score? So, as you can imagine, a huge amount of effort goes into actually developing assessments in the MYP. It's not like these assessments are just handed to teachers. So, the answer is quite simply no. There is no opportunity to redo an assessment. And this is in the assessment and reporting policy, which will be made available. So it's quite important that that is made clear from the start. The only times where this might be adjusted is during serious extenuating circumstances, as I've mentioned here. Often the student would just basically not do the assessment, and the best fit approach would often have to just not include that assessment. We try and avoid that as far as possible, though. One other condition occurs in mathematics. So if a child in grades 6 to 8 scores a 1 or 2, which is regarded as a failing grade, we give them the opportunity of resitting, but not the same assessment, a very similar assessment, so that they can have the opportunity to push their grade up to a 3. Of course, it would be unfair to let them push it up to any grade, because it wouldn't be fair to other students, but at least it gives the students an opportunity to gain a greater understanding of the work, which they seemingly don't understand very well at that stage. Another important aspect in the assessment and reporting policy is the infringement protocol. And I'm not going to read through all of this now, but it is very important. If your child happens to be late in handing an assignment in, which happens more often than we would like, we do go through certain steps, and there's very little room for negotiation at the end of this. We try and be as fair as possible. So it's important that you do try and support your child in getting organized electronically, so that when they are submitting documents, there's no corrupted files, they're submitting in the right place at the right time, and of course just liaise with the teacher if you are not sure of anything in that regard. Also, if a student is absent for an in-class timed assessment, we do have protocols which we need to adhere to. So these are documented here, but once again, the best is to just communicate with the teacher as soon as possible and arrange a time when the makeup assessment can be taken. So just one other final thing to mention. On the school's website in the parents area, there is a section for school policies. And the one policy I'd like to draw your attention to is the academic honesty policy, which looks like this. So, especially during distance learning, it is the student's responsibility to know about, and the parent's responsibility to read and understand this policy in its entirety. Things that to look out for, of course, the usual plagiarism, duplication, etc. But the big one is collusion. Okay, students will be more tempted to work together and help each other out here and there. This is simply not allowed, and collusion is something which will result potentially in students getting a 0 and then having to attend sessions with Ms. TJ in the library on academic honesty. So it's very important that we work together to adhere to the academic honesty policy as much as we can. So there are some MYP specific transgressions over here as well. Most of them are fairly straightforward and obvious. And then in terms of what happens, first offense, second offense, third offense, grade 9 and 10 versus grade 7, 8, and then grade 6. Well, thank you for listening. I hope this has been useful, and there will no doubt be more questions. There will be a series of videos released by each of the heads of faculty which will explain in detail about their subject and how they have made adjustments based on the current circumstances. So watch out for these. They will be coming shortly. The curriculum guide updates will also be published in the week of the 13th of September. So looking forward to sharing those all with you. And please have a wonderful year, and I look forward to meeting many of you as soon as possible, hopefully face to face. Okay, all the best.